The sound of diesel engines at dawn wasn't unusual on the Morrison farm, except when those engines belonged to strangers who had no business being there. Sarah Morrison dropped her coffee mug when she spotted the white pickup truck with Meadowbrook, HOA emblazoned on its side, parked squarely in the middle of her family's hayfield. Two men in polo shirts and khakis were marching around her property with clipboards, measuring tape, and the kind of self-important swagger that made her blood boil. "Tom," she called to her husband, who was fixing fence posts near the barn. "We've got trespassers." Tom Morrison had worked this land for 37 years, just like his father before him and his grandfather before that. The 150-acre spread had been in the Morrison family since 1923, long before the fancy Meadowbrook subdivision sprouted up like mushrooms after rain on the adjacent parcels. He watched with growing unease as million-dollar homes replaced cornfields, bringing with them homeowners who complained about the smell of manure and the sound of roosters crowing at sunrise. But this was different. This was his land, deed recorded, taxes paid, boundaries clearly marked. And these intruders were acting like they owned the place. "Excuse me." Tom strode across the field, his work boots crushing the morning dew. "This is private property. You need to leave. Now." The taller of the two men, a red-faced fellow with a clipboard clutched to his chest like a shield, barely looked up. "Are you a landowner?" "I am." "Tom Morrison." "And you are?" "Harold Pembroke, HOA president for Meadowbrook Estates." He gestured vaguely toward the subdivision visible beyond the tree line. "We're conducting a survey of this parcel." "Survey?" Sarah had caught up to them, her eyes flashing with a kind of anger that made smart men take a step back. Harold Pembroke was apparently not a smart man. "Yes, ma'am. According to our records, this property falls within the boundaries of our homeowners association. We've been trying to contact you about compliance issues." Tom felt his jaw tighten. "What compliance issues? This is a working farm that's been here for a century. Your subdivision is barely 10 years old." Harold consulted his clipboard with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice reviewing constitutional law. "Livestock restrictions, agricultural building codes, noise ordinances. Frankly, Mr. Morrison, your operation here is in violation of several HOA regulations." "Your HOA regulations don't apply to property that's not in your HOA," Sarah said slowly, as if speaking to a particularly dense child. "That's where you're wrong." Harold's companion, a weaselly man named Jenkins, according to his name tag, finally spoke up. "We've our legal team review the property boundaries. When Clearwater Development purchased the land for Meadowbrook Estates, the deed included a provision that extends HOA authority to all adjoining agricultural parcels. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the hay. Tom Morrison had faced down charging bulls, survived 3 tornadoes, and once spent 16 hours straight bringing in a harvest ahead of a hailstorm. But he never felt rage quite like this, cold, calculating, and absolutely certain of its purpose. "Get off my land," he said quietly. "Now see here," Harold began. "Get off my land." Tom's voice carried across the field like thunder, sending a flock of crows into panicked flight. But as the two HOA officials retreated to their truck, Harold called back with a smugness that would prove to be his downfall. "We'll be back tomorrow with proper documentation, and next time we're bringing the county inspector." Tom and Sarah watched the white pickup disappear down the gravel drive, leaving nothing but dust and the promise of war. That evening, Tom Morrison sat at his kitchen table surrounded by manila folders, deed copies, and survey maps that hadn't seen daylight in decades. His reading glasses perched on the end of his nose as he squinted at faded property documents, while Sarah paced behind him like a caged tiger. "This is insane," she muttered, phone pressed to her ear. "Margaret, are you absolutely sure about what you heard at the grocery store?" Their neighbor, Margaret Chetton, had called an hour earlier with disturbing news. As president of the local farmers cooperative, she kept her ear to the ground about anything that might affect agricultural operations in the county. What she'd learned at Miller's feed store had sent chills down Sarah's spine. "Harold Pembroke has been bragging all over town." Margaret's voice crackled through the speakerphone. "Says he's figured out a way to clean up the rural eyesores around Meadowbrook Estates. Apparently, he's convinced 3 other farmers to sell their land after threatening them with bogus HOA violations and county fines." Tom looked up from a 1987 property survey. 3 farmers? Who? "Jim Hendricks over on Maple Ridge Road sold last month. The Kowalski place went up for sale 2 weeks ago. Remember, they had that beautiful apple orchard? And yesterday, I heard that old Pete Richardson is talking to a realtor about his dairy operation." Sarah sank into a chair. "Pete's been running that dairy for 40 years. His grandfather started it. Harold's been telling everyone that these properties were improperly zoned and that he has legal authority to enforce HOA standards on agricultural land." Most folks don't have the money to fight in court, so they just cave. After Margaret hung up, Tom pulled out his most prized possession, the original deed to the Morrison farms, signed by his great-grandfather in 1923. The thick parchment was yellow with age, but every word was still legible. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a specific clause. "This property was granted in perpetuity for agricultural use with all mineral rights, water rights, and protection from municipal interference." Sarah leaned over his shoulder. "Protection from municipal interference. That sounds pretty clear to me." "Clear as day." Tom reached for another folder. "And here's the survey from 1965 when they built the county road. Our property line is marked with iron stakes. I've seen them myself. We're a full quarter-mile from the nearest Meadowbrook property." But it was Sarah who made the discovery that changed everything. While Tom focused on the legal documents, she'd been researching Harold Pembroke online. What she found made her stomach turn. "Tom, look at this." She turned her laptop screen toward him. "Harold Pembroke isn't just HOA president. He's also a partner in Clearwater Development, the same company that built Meadowbrook Estates." Tom's eyes widened as he read the corporate filing. Son of a, it gets worse. Clearwater Development has been buying up distressed agricultural properties for the past 2 years. Properties that were supposedly non-compliant with HOA regulations. Sarah clicked through several news articles. They buy the land cheap from desperate farmers, then turn around and sell it to luxury home builders for 10 times what they paid. The pieces fell together like dominoes. Harold wasn't enforcing HOA regulations. He was running a sophisticated land grab scheme using fear and fake legal authority to steal family farms. "We need a lawyer," Tom said grimly. "Already called one." Sarah held up her phone. "Jennifer Walsh, you remember she's married to Bill Walsh, who runs the hardware store. She specializes in property law, and she's seen this scam before. She can meet with us tomorrow morning." Tom stood up and walked to the window overlooking his hayfields. In the distance, the lights of Meadowbrook Estates twinkled like falling stars. Tomorrow, Harold Pembroke would return with his county inspector and his bogus paperwork, expecting to find another defeated farmer ready to surrender his heritage. Instead, he was going to find the fight of his life. "Sarah," Tom said quietly, "call your brother Mike. The one with the construction company. That's the one. Ask him if he can spare a few loads of hay bales tomorrow. Big ones." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking?" Tom's reflection in the window showed a smile that would have made his frontier ancestors proud. "I'm thinking Harold Pembroke is about to learn the difference between paper authority and property rights. And I'm thinking he's going to learn it the hard way." Sarah watched from the kitchen window as her brother Mike's flat truck rolled up the gravel drive, loaded with 12 massive round hay bales, each one weighing close to 1,000 pounds. Behind him came 2 more trucks from the local farmers' cooperative, carrying equipment that would make Harold Pembroke's day very, very complicated. "You sure about this, Tom?" Mike Chen stepped down from his cab, grinning like a man about to watch his favorite team play in the championship. At 6'4" and built like a linebacker, Mike had never met a bully he didn't want to take down a peg. Tom emerged from the barn carrying a thermos of coffee and wearing the kind of smile that meant trouble for someone. "Harold said he'd be back today with proper documentation and a county inspector. I figure we should roll out the red carpet." Jennifer Walsh, their property lawyer, had arrived an hour earlier with excellent news. After reviewing the Morrison deed and conducting her own research into Clearwater Development, she confirmed what they suspected. Harold's claims were completely fraudulent. The HOA had no authority over their land, and the county inspector Harold mentioned was likely another con man in his employ. "The good news is you have every right to defend your property from trespassers," Jennifer had explained. "The even better news is that Harold has been running this scam across 3 counties. The FBI is already investigating Clearwater Development for mail fraud and extortion." But Tom Morrison wasn't content to wait for federal justice. Sometimes a man needed to handle things the old-fashioned way. "All right, boys," Tom called to the assembled crew of farmers, equipment operators, and one very eager brother-in-law. "Let's set the stage." The plan was elegantly simple. Harold's pattern was predictable. He always parked in the same spot in the hayfield, blocking the main gate so the property owner couldn't escape while he delivered his threats. The county road formed a natural bottleneck at the Morrison property entrance, with deep drainage ditches on both sides that would stop a tank. Mike positioned his crane truck near the barn while 2 other farmers used their tractors to strategically place hay bales around the field. To anyone driving by, it looked like normal farm work, moving feed, preparing for winter storage, the kind of agricultural activity that had been happening on this land for a century. But Tom had positioned those bales with military precision. When the time came, they could be moved into a perfect trap within minutes. "Sarah, you're our early warning system." Tom said, handing her a pair of binoculars and a two-way radio. Soon as you spot Harold's truck coming down the county road, you give us the signal. Sarah took her position on the second floor of the farmhouse with a clear view of the road for 2 miles in either direction. The waiting game began. At 9:47 a.m., her radio crackled to life. White pickup truck, half a mile out and closing fast. 2 occupants and there's a sit-in following behind. Tom keyed his radio. Showtime, gentlemen. The choreography that followed would have impressed a Broadway director. Mike's crane lifted the first massive hay bale into position across the gravel drive 20 feet behind where Harold always parked. 2 tractors pushed additional bales to block the side routes through the field. Within 3 minutes, they had created perfect enclosure, invisible to anyone approaching from the county road, but impossible to escape once you were inside. Harold's white pickup truck pulled into the Morrison driveway exactly on schedule, followed by a beat-up sit-in containing a man in a rumpled suit who was probably the fake county inspector. Both vehicles parked in their usual spots, completely oblivious to the trap that had just closed behind them. Remember, everyone stays calm and legal. Tom radioed to his crew, who had taken positions around the property with perfect sightlines to the unfolding drama. We're just moving hay bales on our own land. If anyone asks, it's routine farm work. Harold and Jenkins climbed out of their truck with the same arrogant swagger as the day before, joined by the fake inspector, who immediately began taking pictures with an expensive camera. All 3 men wore identical smirks, clearly believing they were about to terrorize another farmer into submission. Tom walked out to meet them, his hands empty except for a coffee cup and his property deed. "Morning, Harold. I see you brought a friend." "This is County Inspector Davidson," Harold announced with theatrical importance. "He's here to document the numerous code violations on this property." The fake inspector stepped forward with his clipboard. "Mr. Morrison, I'm going to need you to cease all agricultural operations immediately while we conduct our assessment." Tom took a slow sip of his coffee, savoring the moment. Behind Harold's truck, Mike was quietly positioning another hay bale with surgical precision. "Well now, Inspector Davidson," Tom said conversationally, "I'd be happy to cooperate. But first, I'd like to see your county identification and your inspection warrant." The fake inspector's face went pale. "I don't mean a warrant for obvious violations." "Actually, you do." Tom pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Sheriff Johnson, Tom Morrison here. I've got some folks on my property claiming to be county officials, but they can't produce proper identification. Could you send a deputy out here?" The blood drained from Harold's face as he realized the tables had turned. He spun around toward his truck and froze. A 1,000-pound hay bale now sat directly behind his pickup truck. Another blocked the route to his left. A third had appeared to his right. As he turned in a complete circle, Harold Pembroke discovered he was trapped in a cage made of hay, with nowhere to run and a very angry farmer holding all the keys. Tom Morrison's smile could have lit up the entire county. "Now then, Harold, I believe we need to have ourselves a conversation about property rights and trespassing and fraud. But don't worry, we've got all day." Harold Pembroke's face went through more color changes than a traffic light as the reality of his situation sank in. The arrogant swagger disappeared, replaced by the frantic look of a cornered rat. "You can't do this," Harold sputtered, spinning in circles as he searched for an escape route that didn't exist. "This is false imprisonment, kidnapping. I'll have you arrested." Tom Morrison took another leisurely sip of his coffee, completely unmoved by Harold's threats. "False imprisonment? I'm just a farmer moving hay bales on my own property. Nothing illegal about that." The fake county inspector, who had introduced himself as Davidson, was frantically trying to squeeze between 2 massive hay bales, his expensive camera abandoned on the ground. "There has to be a way out of here." "Oh, there is," Tom said helpfully. "Soon as the sheriff arrives and sorts out who you folks really are, I'll be happy to move these bales and let you go." Sarah's voice crackled over the radio from her lookout post. "Tom, Sheriff Johnson's truck just turned into our drive, and there's a second patrol car behind him." Harold's panic reached new heights. He began shoving against the nearest hay bale with his shoulder, accomplishing nothing except working up a sweat and ruining his polo shirt. "Move these things. Move them right now." "Can't do that, Harold. Health and safety, you understand. These bales weigh near on 1,000 pounds each. Wouldn't want anyone to get hurt." Tom's voice was pure innocence, but his eyes held the glint of a man enjoying every second of his revenge. Sheriff Johnson appeared around the corner of the barn, flanked by Deputy Martinez. Both officers took in the scene with a practiced calm of men who'd seen every kind of rural dispute imaginable, but even they seemed impressed by Tom's creative solution. "Morning, Tom," Sarah called about some folks claiming to be county officials. "That's right, Sheriff. This gentleman here." Tom gestured toward the sweating fake inspector. Says he's County Inspector Davidson. Claims he's got authority to shut down my farm operation. But when I asked for his credentials and inspection warrant, he got mighty evasive. Sheriff Johnson approached the trapped Satan, where Davidson was now cowering behind the steering wheel. Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification. Davidson fumbled in his jacket pocket, producing a laminated card that wouldn't have fooled a kindergartner. Sheriff Johnson examined it for exactly 3 seconds before shaking his head. This is a fake ID, son. Real county inspectors don't get their badges printed at Kinko's. He turned to Deputy Martinez. Call it in. I want to know who this man really is. Harold made one last desperate play. You don't understand? I'm Harold Pembroke, president of Meadowbrook Estates HOA. I have legal authority over this property. No, you don't, said a new voice. Jennifer Walsh stepped into view, carrying a briefcase and wearing the satisfied expression of a lawyer about to destroy someone's day. In fact, Mr. Pembroke, what you have is a federal investigation into your fraudulent business practices. The color drained from Harold's face so fast that Tom wondered if the man might faint. Jennifer opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Sheriff, I've been in contact with Agent Rebecca Torres from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. They've been tracking a multi-county fraud scheme involving fake HOA claims against agricultural properties. Mr. Pembroke here is our primary suspect. Deputy Martinez radio crackled. Martinez, this is dispatch. That fake inspector. His real name is Robert Dalton. He's got outstanding warrants in 3 states for fraud and impersonation of a government official. Harold Pembroke seemed to shrink into himself as the walls closed in. His voice came out as a whisper. This is all a misunderstanding. We can work this out. Oh, we're going to work it out, all right, Tom said. He pulled out his phone and showed Harold the screen. See, while you boys were trapped in here, I took the liberty of calling Pete Richardson, Jim Hendricks, and the Kowalski family. Funny thing, they all want to press charges against you for extortion and fraud. The sound that came from Harold's throat was somewhere between a whimper and a death rattle. Sheriff Johnson began reading Harold his rights while Deputy Martinez cuffed the fake inspector. But Tom wasn't quite finished with his tormentor. Harold, Tom called out as the handcuffs clicked into place. You remember what you said yesterday about coming back with proper documentation? Harold looked up with the hollow eyes of a defeated man. Tom reached into his jacket and pulled out his original property deed. Well, here's my proper documentation. This farm has been in my family for over a century, protected by law from municipal interference. Your fake HOA has no authority here, never did, and never will. He gestured toward the hay bales surrounding them. And this is what we call natural consequences. You tried to steal my land with lies and intimidation. Instead, you got educated about property rights by 1,000 pounds of Timothy hay. As Sheriff Johnson led Harold toward the patrol car, the once arrogant HOA president turned back one last time. This isn't over, Morrison. Tom Morrison smiled the slow, satisfied smile of a man who just won the war. Yes, Harold, it is. Mike fired up his crane truck and began lifting the hay bales, opening Harold's cage for the last time. As the patrol cars disappeared down the gravel drive carrying Harold Pembroke and his accomplice toward their date with federal justice, Tom felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized was there. The Morrison farm was safe. The legacy would continue. And somewhere in the distance he could swear he heard the approving whispers of 4 generations of his ancestors, carried on the wind across the hayfields they'd all called home. 3 months later, Tom Morrison stood in the same hayfield where Harold Pembroke had first trespassed, but everything had changed. Where once there had been tension and uncertainty, now there was peace and sweet, satisfying justice. The morning newspaper lay folded on his kitchen table, its headline reading, Former HOA President send TNCED to 8 years for land fraud scheme. The accompanying article detailed how Harold Pembroke and his network of fake inspectors had bilked 12 farming families across 3 counties out of nearly $2 million in property value. Sarah emerged from the house carrying 2 steaming mugs of coffee and wearing the biggest smile Tom had seen in years. Did you read the part about restitution? Tom grinned and accepted the coffee. Judge ordered Clearwater Development to pay full market value to every family they cheated, plus punitive damages. Pete Richardson gets to keep his dairy and retire comfortably. The Kowalskis are rebuilding their apple orchard. Jim Hendricks bought back his land and is already planning next season's crops. And Harold? Federal prison. 8 years, no parole. Turns out when you mess with the FBI, they don't take kindly to fraud schemes that target hardworking families. Tom took a satisfied sip. His fake inspector buddy got 6 years as an accomplice. The sound of approaching vehicles interrupted their conversation, but these engines brought good news. A convoy of pickup trucks and trailers rolled up the Morrison driveway. Filled with neighbors, fellow farmers, and friends who'd come to help celebrate the harvest and the victory. Mike Chen jumped down from his crane truck, the same one he used to trap Harold with hay bales. "Morning, brother-in-law. Ready to move some hay to leave away this time?" Behind him came a parade of familiar faces. Pete Richardson with his dairy truck, the Kowalski family bringing homemade apple cider from their restored orchard, Jim Hendricks carrying a case of his famous barbecue sauce, and Margaret Chen from the Farmers Cooperative with enough food to feed an army. "What's all this?" Tom asked, though his voice was thick with emotion. "This," said Jennifer Walsh, stepping out of her car with a briefcase full of good news, "is what we call a victory celebration and a barn raising." She gestured toward the far end of the property, where the foundation for a new equipment barn was already being poured. Thanks to the restitution money from Clearwater Development, every family they targeted is not only getting their land back, but compensation for improvements and damages. Your share is enough to build that new barn you've been talking about for 20 years. The celebration that followed was everything a small farming community should be: neighbors helping neighbors, children running through the hayfields, elderly farmers sharing stories of their own battles with bureaucracy and corporate bullies. As the sun reached its peak, Tom found himself standing exactly where Harold Pembroke had been trapped by hay bales, but now surrounded by friends instead of enemies. Sheriff Johnson wandered over, carrying a plate loaded with barbecue and Pete Richardson's famous corn on the cob. "Tom, I've been meaning to ask, how do you know those hay bales would hold Harold and his buddy without anyone getting hurt?" Tom's eyes twinkled with mischief. "Well, Sheriff, when you've been farming for 40 years, you learn a thing or two about physics. Those bales were positioned so they couldn't roll or tip, but a man could climb over them if he really needed to escape. Of course, Harold was too panicked to figure that out. And if he had, then he would have fallen face first into the manure pile Mike strategically placed on the other side." Tom grinned. Sometimes the best traps are the ones that give folks exactly what they deserve. As the afternoon wore on, something magical happened. Children who'd grown up in Meadowbrook Estates subdivision began talking to farming kids about crops and animals. Suburban parents discovered that fresh milk tastes different from store-bought, and that the smell of hay isn't offensive. It's the perfume of honest work. Old divisions between country and subdivision began to blur as people realized they were all just neighbors sharing the same piece of earth. Harold Pembroke's plan to eliminate rural eyesores had backfired spectacularly. Instead of driving farmers away, his persecution had united the community and reminded everyone what really mattered: family, land, and the bonds between people who look out for each other. As the sun began to set, painting the hayfields in shades of gold and amber, Tom Morrison stood with his arm around his wife, watching their friends and neighbors work together to raise the frame of their new barn. In the distance, the lights of Meadowbrook Estates were beginning to twinkle, but they no longer seemed like falling stars. They looked like part of the constellation, each light representing a family that belonged to this place. "You know what the best part is?" Sarah asked, leaning into her husband's shoulder. "What's that?" "Harold spent all that time and money trying to buy our land, and he never understood the one thing that really mattered." She gestured toward the scene around them. Children playing, neighbors laughing. 3 generations working side by side to build something lasting. This land was never for sale, not for any price, because some things are worth more than money. Tom Morrison nodded, watching his great-grandfather's farm prepare for another century of family stewardship. Harold Pembroke had learned the hard way that when you try to steal a man's heritage, you better be prepared for the consequences. Sometimes those consequences come wrapped in legal documents and federal indictments, and sometimes they come wrapped in 1,000-pound hay bales delivered with a farmer's justice and a community's love. The Morrison farm was home, and it always would be.